summer of 1994 was a turning point in my life, though I didn't know it at the time. I was Hank McAllister, a 38-year-old writer with a half-finished novel and a soul weighed down by the monotony of city life. For years, I'd been trapped in a cycle of fluorescent-lit offices, endless deadlines, and the constant hum of urban noise. A life that felt like a slow suffocation, draining the color from my days. I worked as a copywriter for a small advertising firm in Seattle, crafting slogans for products I didn't care about, my creativity stifled by the demands of the 9-to-5 grind. At night, I'd return to my cramped apartment, the walls paper-thin, the city's clamor seeping through the cracks, and I'd stare at the blank pages of my novel, the words refusing to come. I needed an escape, a place to reconnect with the part of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. So I decided to take a trip, to leave behind the concrete jungle and find solace in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. I packed my essentials into my rusting RV, a 1970s relic with peeling paint, a stubborn engine, and a faint smell of mildew that never quite went away, and set out for a remote campsite I'd heard about from a fellow traveler. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a chance to fish, write, and rediscover the silence I craved. But what I found in those woods was a darkness so profound, so ancient, that it changed me forever, leaving scars that still whisper in the quiet moments of my life. The journey began with a sense of liberation, the kind that washes over you when the city skyline fades in your rearview mirror and the open road stretches out like a promise of something better. I'd chosen a lesser-known campsite deep in the forests of Washington, a place I'd heard about months earlier at a roadside diner outside Tacoma. The traveler who told me about it was an older man, his face weathered by years on the road, his eyes sharp with a knowledge I didn't yet understand. He'd spoken of the campsite in hushed tones, describing it as a hidden gem where the towering pines whispered secrets, and the air was so still you could hear your own heartbeat. "It's a place to truly disconnect," he'd said, his voice low, his gaze distant, as if he were looking through me to some memory he didn't want to share. At the time, I thought his tone was just the eccentricity of a seasoned wanderer, but now I wonder if he was trying to warn me, if he'd seen the same shadows I would come to know too well. The drive to the campsite was a pilgrimage through a landscape that seemed to grow wilder with every mile. The highways gave way to narrow, winding roads, their asphalt cracked and faded, the lines barely visible beneath a layer of pine needles and dust. The valleys I passed through were deep and shadowed, the sunlight filtering through the trees in thin, golden strands that cast long, wavering patterns on the ground. The forest closed in around me, its presence a living thing, the trees towering like ancient guardians, their branches interlocking to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. By the time I reached the campsite, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the world in shades of amber and gold, the shadows stretching long and thin across the clearing where I parked my RV. The spot was nestled by a placid lake, its surface a perfect mirror for the towering pines that surrounded it, their reflections shimmering in the fading light, the water so still it seemed to hold its breath. The first few days were a revelation, a return to a kind of peace I hadn't known I'd been missing. The forest was a cathedral of green, its canopy so dense that sunlight filtered through in dappled patterns, painting the forest floor in shifting mosaics of light and shadow that danced with the breeze. I spent my mornings fishing at the lake, my folding chair creaking under my weight as I sat on the shore, the gentle lapping of water against the rocks, a soothing rhythm that lulled my mind into a state of quiet. I'd cast my line, the faint plop of the lure breaking the silence, and wait for the tug of a trout, the fish shimmering silver in the sunlight as I reeled them in, their scales glinting like tiny mirrors. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine resin and damp earth, a smell so clean it felt like it could wash away the grime of city life. Afternoons were for hiking, my boots crunching on a carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves as I followed trails that wound through the underbrush, the ferns brushing against my legs, their fronds soft and damp with morning dew. The trails were narrow, their edges blurred by overgrowth, as if the forest was slowly reclaiming them, erasing the marks of human passage. At night, I'd build a campfire in the clearing, the flames crackling and popping as they consumed the dry wood, casting a warm, flickering glow across the campsite. I'd sit on a log, my old guitar in my lap, its strings worn but still resonant, and strum melodies that echoed through the stillness, the notes mingling with the whispers of the wind through the branches. The sky above was a glittering tapestry of stars, their light sharp and cold, a reminder of the vastness of the universe, of how small I was in the grand scheme of things. There was no cell service, no hum of traffic, no distractions. Just me, the forest, and the silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. It was blissful, a kind of solitude that felt like a balm for my soul, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like the words from my novel might finally come. I'd sit by the fire, a notebook in my lap, scribbling ideas as they came, the crackle of the flames a steady companion, the lake's gentle ripples a soft counterpoint to the night's quiet. But on the fourth evening, that peace shattered like glass, the fragments cutting deeper than I could have imagined. I just finished cleaning a couple of trout for dinner, my hands slick with fish scales and lake water, the fire casting a warm glow across the clearing, its light flickering in the growing darkness. I was kneeling by the fire, the trout sizzling on a makeshift grill, their savory aroma mingling with the smoky scent of burning pine, when I heard a rustling in the underbrush nearby. It was a soft sound at first, barely noticeable over the crackle of the flames, a faint whisper of movement that could have been the wind or a small animal scurrying through the ferns. But then came a sharp crack, like dry twigs snapping under a heavy weight, the sound so distinct it cut through the night like a blade. I froze, my knife hovering over the fish, my breath catching in my throat as I turned my head toward the treeline, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. The forest was a wall of shadow now, the last light of day swallowed by the night, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze, their shapes distorted by the firelight. The air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I grabbed my flashlight from the picnic table, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife, but all I saw were shadows dancing in the light, their forms elongated and twisted, as if the forest was playing tricks on my mind. The noise stopped, the silence returning with a weight that pressed down on me, but a creeping unease settled over me, a feeling I couldn't shake, a primal instinct that whispered of danger in the dark. I told myself it was a bear, or maybe a deer, its hooves snapping twigs as it moved through the underbrush, but the explanation felt hollow, a city dweller's attempt to rationalize the unknown. I returned to my dinner, the trout charred slightly from my distraction, but my appetite was gone, replaced by a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if the forest was watching me, its gaze a physical weight I couldn't escape. As night fell, the wind picked up, sending an eerie howl through the trees that made the flames of my fire flicker and dance, their shadows writhing on the ground like living things. I sat by the campfire, nursing a beer, the bottle cold against my palm, trying to relax, but my senses were on edge, every sound amplified in the stillness. The forest was alive with whispers now, the wind carrying the creak of branches, the rustle of leaves, the faint hoot of an owl somewhere in the distance, each sound a thread in a tapestry of unease that wove itself around me. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision, just beyond the firelight, a shadow that moved too quickly to be a trick of the light. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, but whatever it was had vanished into the darkness, leaving only the rustling leaves in its wake, their sound a mocking echo of my fear. I scanned the treeline, my flashlight trembling in my hand, its beam wavering as I swept it across the forest, but the darkness gave nothing away, its silence more menacing than any sound. The shadows seemed to shift and breathe, their shapes twisting into forms that weren't quite natural. Claws, eyes, a hunched figure that disappeared when I blinked, as if the forest was toying with me, testing my resolve. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, the isolation getting under my skin, the solitude I'd craved now a double-edged sword that cut too deep. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a weight that pressed down on me, a cold dread that settled into my bones as I climbed into the RV and locked the door, the creak of the old vehicle a hollow comfort in the night. I lay in the cramped bed, the blankets heavy against my skin, listening to the wind howl outside. Its mournful cry a reminder of how alone I was, how far I was from help if something went wrong. The next day, I decided to hike deeper into the forest, hoping to clear my head and shake off the unease that had taken root, its tendrils wrapping around my thoughts like the ivy that clung to the trees. The trails were narrow, the underbrush thick with ferns and brambles that snagged at my boots, their thorns sharp against the leather, the air cool and damp beneath the canopy, carrying the scent of moss and decay. The forest was denser here, the trees closer together, their trunks slick with moisture, their branches interlocking to form a ceiling that filtered the sunlight into a dim, greenish haze, the light casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to follow me as I walked. As I moved deeper into the woods, I noticed something strange. Every now and then, I'd come across symbols carved into the trees, their shapes rough and jagged, as if etched with a dull knife or a rock. The bark peeled away to reveal the pale wood beneath, its surface blackened at the edges, as if the symbols had been burned into the tree. The symbols were unlike anything I'd seen before, a series of intersecting lines and curves that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, their shapes both alien and familiar, as if they were a language I'd once known but had forgotten. Some were simple, a single spiral or a series of slashes, while others were more complex, a web of lines that formed a shape like a distorted eye, its center hollow, as if staring back at me. I took a few pictures with my camera, the click of the shutter loud in the stillness, figuring I'd look them up later when I had a signal, but the sight of them made my skin crawl, a primal instinct warning me to turn back, to leave this place and never return. I pressed on, determined to reclaim the peace I'd come for, but the forest felt different now, its silence oppressive, its shadows deeper, as if it was hiding something just out of sight, a secret it didn't want me to uncover. About an hour into my hike, the trail opened into a small clearing, and there, hidden behind a curtain of moss and ivy, was an old cabin, its form practically swallowed by the forest, as if the trees themselves had grown around it, claiming it as their own. The roof had caved in, the wooden beams splintered and rotting, their ends jagged and blackened, as if they'd been struck by lightning years ago and left to decay. One of the walls leaned precariously to one side, its boards warped and splintered, held together by rusted nails that seemed to groan under the strain, as if a strong wind might bring the whole structure down. The windows were shattered, their jagged edges glinting in the dim light, the glass long gone, replaced by a darkness that seemed to seep out of the cabin like a living thing. The door hung askew, its hinges rusted and bent, creaking faintly in the breeze, a mournful sound that echoed through the clearing like a warning. Curiosity got the better of me, a dangerous compulsion that overrode the fear gnawing at my insides, and I approached, my boots sinking into the soft earth, the ground spongy beneath my feet, as if it had been soaked by years of rain and decay. I peered inside, my eyes adjusting to the gloom, the air thick with the smell of rot, a rancid stench that made my stomach churn, a mix of mold and something sweeter, more primal, that I couldn't quite place. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking ominously underfoot, each step a gamble as I half expected the wood to give way beneath me, plunging me into whatever darkness lay below. The interior was a study in decay, the walls stained with streaks of black mold, their surfaces peeling to reveal the rotting wood beneath, the air heavy with the weight of years. A table stood in the center, its surface covered in old, yellowed papers, their edges curling with age. The ink faded to a ghostly gray, the words illegible but for a few fragments. Sacrifice, blood, eternal. A rusted lantern hung from a nail in the wall, its glass cracked and clouded with grime, the wick long since burned away, a relic of a time when this place had been alive, when it had been a sanctuary for someone or something. I was about to turn back, the weight of the cabin's silence pressing down on me, when I saw something that made my blood run cold, a sight that would haunt me for years to come. In the center of the room was a large wooden crate, its surface covered in more of those strange symbols, their shapes even more intricate than the ones on the trees, a complex web of lines and curves that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if they were alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy. The crate was old, its wood splintered and warped, the symbols carved deep into its surface, their edges blackened and charred, as if they'd been burned into the wood with a branding iron. I felt an inexplicable dread as I approached, my instincts screaming at me to leave, to run and never look back. But something compelled me to stay, a morbid curiosity that overrode my fear, a need to know what secrets the crate held. Ignoring the warning, I reached out and lifted the lid, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound like the wail of a dying animal that echoed through the cabin, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside were dozens of photographs, scattered haphazardly, their edges worn and faded, the images blurred by time and neglect. They were of people, mostly families, smiling at the camera, their faces frozen in moments of happiness, their eyes bright with joy, their mouths open in laughter. There were children holding ice cream cones, parents posing by campfires, couples standing arm in arm by the lake, their love captured in the grainy film. But there was something wrong about them, a violation that turned my stomach, a desecration of their innocence. Each picture had been defaced, the eyes scratched out with a sharp object, the marks deep and jagged, as if someone had taken a knife to the film in a fit of rage. The mouths were obscured by black ink, thick and smeared, as if the person who'd done it had wanted to erase their voices, to silence their joy forever. Beneath the photos were newspaper clippings, their headlines stark and chilling, the paper yellowed and brittle, the ink smudged but still legible. Local family vanishes without a trace. Hiker missing in Pacific Northwest forest. Search for missing campers yields no clues. All were dated within the past decade. A grim timeline of disappearances that stretched back years. Each article a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. One clipping stood out, its headline larger than the others. Cult activity suspected in string of disappearances. The article detailing rumors of a group that had operated in the forest in the 1970s, performing rituals to appease an ancient deity. Their practices involving sacrifices, human sacrifices, to ensure their own survival. The article mentioned symbols, markings found on trees and rocks near the sites of the disappearances. Symbols that matched the ones I'd seen. A connection that made my heart race, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as the pieces began to fall into place. I stumbled back, dropping the lid in horror, the sound echoing through the cabin like a gunshot, the air growing colder, the shadows deeper, as if the cabin itself was alive, its walls whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. The weight of the forest pressed in on me, the darkness closing in, a suffocating presence that seemed to seep into my bones, filling me with a dread I couldn't shake. I had to get out of there, to escape the cabin and the memories it held. The ghosts of those lost souls reaching out from the photographs, their scratched-out eyes staring at me from the darkness. I turned and sprinted back toward the RV, my heart pounding in my chest, branches tearing at my clothes, their thorns drawing thin lines of blood on my arms as I ran, the forest a blur of green and brown around me, its whispers turning to screams in my mind. When I finally reached the campsite, my lungs burning, my legs trembling, I locked the door of the RV and sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd seen. The photographs, the newspaper clippings, the symbols. They were evidence of something terrible, a darkness that had taken root in the forest, a malevolent force that had claimed lives and would claim more if it wasn't stopped. I knew I needed to leave as soon as possible, to put as much distance between me and that cabin as I could, to escape the forest and the shadows that lurked within it. I grabbed my keys, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped them, and started the engine. The roar of the RV a desperate plea against the silence of the forest, its sound a lifeline in the encroaching darkness. As I drove down the narrow dirt road, the trees closed in around me, their branches scraping against the RV like skeletal fingers, the sound a grating screech that set my nerves on edge. The road twisted and turned in a maze of green and brown, the forest a living wall that seemed to shift and move, its shadows stretching long and thin across the path, as if trying to hold me back. It was just past dusk, the sky a deep indigo streaked with the last hints of orange, the stars beginning to emerge like cold, unblinking eyes, when I saw him. A figure standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by the RV's headlights, his form stark against the fading light. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, with wild, unkempt hair that fell in tangled strands around his face, framing eyes that glinted with a feral intensity, their gaze piercing through the windshield like a blade. His clothes were tattered and stained, a patchwork of faded flannel and denim that hung loosely on his gaunt frame. As if he hadn't changed them in weeks, the fabric caked with dirt and something darker, something I didn't want to name. I slammed on the brakes, the RV skidding to a halt just a few feet from him, my heart racing as I stared at him through the windshield, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, staring at me with an unnerving intensity, his eyes unblinking, their depths holding a knowledge I didn't want to understand. His face was weathered, the lines etched deep with years of hardship, his skin pale and sallow, as if the forest had drained the life from him, leaving only a husk behind. I honked the horn, the sound sharp and jarring in the stillness, hoping to startle him off the road. But he remained frozen in place, his expression unreadable, his presence a silent threat that filled me with dread. I considered reversing, but the road was too narrow, the trees too close, their branches pressing against the RV, their shadows merging with the darkness, and I was afraid of getting stuck, of being trapped in the forest with him. Leaning out the window, I shouted, "Hey, get out of the way!" My voice trembling despite my attempt to sound firm, the words swallowed by the night. He didn't respond, didn't even blink, his gaze locked on mine, a silent challenge that made my skin crawl. Instead, he raised his hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and pointed toward the woods, his arms steady despite the shake. A silent command that sent a chill down my spine, the gesture as deliberate as it was menacing. My skin prickled with fear as I realized he was pointing in the direction of the cabin, as if he knew what I'd seen, as if he wanted me to go back, to face whatever darkness waited there. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted, didn't give him the chance to speak, to draw me into whatever madness he was a part of. I shifted the RV into reverse, the tires skidding on the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust that glowed in the headlights as I backed away. My eyes locked on him as he watched me retreat, his expression almost disappointed, a faint smile curling his lips, a smile that held no warmth, only a cold, predatory amusement. When I finally reached a wider section of the road, I turned the RV around, the vehicle groaning under the strain, and sped away, my hands trembling on the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest as I refused to look back, the forest a wall of darkness at my back, its whispers following me like a haunting refrain. That night, I parked at a rest stop along the highway, grateful for the presence of other vehicles, their headlights a comforting glow against the darkness, their engines a steady hum that grounded me in the reality of the world beyond the forest. I locked the doors, double-checking the latches, and settled into the cramped bed at the back of the RV, the mattress creaking under my weight, exhaustion overtaking me as I tried to push the day's events from my mind. Sleep was fitful, my dreams plagued by images of those defaced photographs, the symbols on the trees, the man's unsettling gaze, his finger pointing into the darkness, his smile a promise of something terrible. I saw the faces of the families in the photos, their scratched-out eyes staring at me, their mouths moving silently, trying to speak, to warn me, their voices lost to the black ink that silenced them. I woke with a start, my body drenched in sweat, the air in the RV heavy with the weight of my nightmares, the windows fogged with condensation, my breath visible in the faint light as I tried to calm my racing heart. In the morning, I decided to head to the nearest town and report what I'd found, hoping for answers, for some kind of closure to the terror that had taken root in my mind, its tendrils wrapping around my thoughts, refusing to let go. The town was small, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and strangers were met with cautious curiosity, their smiles warm but their eyes sharp, always watching. I made my way to the sheriff's office, a squat brick building with a faded sign out front, the paint peeling to reveal the weathered wood beneath, the windows streaked with grime, the interior smelling of old coffee and desperation. Sheriff Dalton was behind the desk, a middle-aged man with a stern face and a no-nonsense attitude, his uniform crisp but faded, his badge glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. He listened patiently as I recounted my experience, his expression unreadable, his hands folded on the desk in front of him, his fingers drumming a slow, steady rhythm as I spoke. When I mentioned the cabin and the photographs, a flicker of recognition crossed his features, a shadow passing over his eyes, a tightening of his jaw that told me he knew more than he was letting on. "You're not the first to see something like that," he said, leaning back in his chair, his voice low and measured, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing the forest in his mind's eye. "We've had reports of strange symbols and missing persons for years, but nothing ever comes of it. It's like the forest swallows them whole, takes them and leaves nothing behind but questions." I showed him the pictures I'd taken of the symbols on the trees, pulling the camera from my bag, the images stark on the small screen, their shapes glowing faintly even in the artificial light. His brow furrowed, his fingers tracing the jagged lines, his expression darkening as he studied them. "Those marks," he muttered, his voice tinged with unease, a hint of fear that he tried to hide. "They're warnings. Old legends talk about a cult that used to operate in these woods. Back in the 70s, they performed rituals, sacrifices to some ancient deity, something they believed lived in the forest, something that demanded blood in exchange for power." A chill ran through me, colder than the morning air, my stomach twisting into knots as I realized the cabin might have been their meeting place, a focal point for whatever darkness had taken root in the forest, a place where the veil between our world and something older, something hungrier, was thin enough to cross. "What about the man on the road?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, the memory of his gaze still fresh in my mind, his smile a haunting echo in my thoughts. The sheriff shook his head, his expression grim, his hands clenching into fists on the desk. "We've had sightings of a hermit living out there, been out there for years, maybe decades. He keeps to himself, doesn't bother anyone. Folks say he's harmless, just a bit touched, driven mad by the forest, by what he's seen." I wasn't convinced. There was nothing harmless about the way he'd looked at me, as if he knew more than he was letting on, as if he was part of something far darker, a witness to the forest's hunger, a keeper of its secrets. I thanked the sheriff and left, feeling more unsettled than ever, the weight of his words pressing down on me as I climbed back into the RV, the engine rumbling to life with a reluctant groan. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a constant prickling sensation on the back of my neck that followed me everywhere I went, a shadow that lingered at the edge of my vision, always just out of sight. Every time I stepped outside the RV, I'd catch glimpses of movement, shadows darting between the trees, their shapes distorted by the fading light, their forms too quick to be human, too deliberate to be animals. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just paranoia, the lingering effects of what I'd seen, the forest playing tricks on my mind, but the feeling grew stronger, a cold dread that settled into my bones, a whisper in the back of my mind that told me I wasn't safe, that I'd never be safe again. Then the disappearances started, a wave of terror that swept through the town like a plague, its tendrils reaching into every home, every conversation. I overheard locals talking at the diner, their voices low and tense, their faces pale with fear, hikers going missing, vanishing without a trace, their campsites found abandoned, their tents slashed open, their belongings scattered across the forest floor like the remnants of a battle they'd lost. Panic began to spread, a palpable tension that hung in the air like a fog, the town's usual warmth replaced by a cold, unspoken fear that seeped into every glance, every whispered word. The sheriff organized search parties to comb the woods, their faces set with determination and dread, their hands gripping flashlights and rifles, their voices calling out names that echoed through the trees, unanswered, swallowed by the forest silence. I joined in, feeling a sense of responsibility to help find them, the memory of those photographs driving me to act, the faces of the missing haunting me, their scratched-out eyes a silent plea for help. The search was grueling, our boots sinking into the soft earth, the mud clinging to our soles, slowing our steps as we trudged through dense underbrush, the ferns and brambles tearing at our clothes, their thorns drawing thin lines of blood on our skin. The forest seemed to close in around us, its silence oppressive, its shadows deeper, as if it was hiding something just beyond our sight, a secret it didn't want us to uncover. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was lurking in the darkness, its presence a physical weight that pressed down on us, its gaze a cold, unblinking stare that followed our every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was during one of these searches that I stumbled upon something chilling, a discovery that would haunt me for years to come. As I pushed through a thicket of brambles, their thorns tearing at my clothes, their sharp points drawing blood that welled up in tiny beads on my skin, I came across another clearing, its edges marked by towering pines that seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a suffocating canopy that blocked out the sky, casting the space in a dim greenish haze. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, weathered and covered in moss, its surface stained with something dark and ancient, a deep, reddish-brown that looked like rust but smelled faintly of copper, a scent that made my stomach churn with nausea. Surrounding the altar were more of those symbols, carved into the ground with eerie precision, their shapes glowing faintly in the dim light, as if they were alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to hum in the air, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in my chest. The altar was old, its edges worn smooth by years of rain and wind, its surface etched with faint scratches that might have been claw marks, their patterns chaotic, as if something had struggled there, something that hadn't wanted to die. The symbols around it were more intricate than the ones I'd seen before, a complex web of lines and curves that formed shapes I couldn't quite decipher, their forms both alien and familiar, as if they were a language I'd once known but had forgotten. Some were spirals, their centers hollow, like eyes staring up at me, while others were jagged, intersecting lines that formed shapes like distorted faces, their mouths open in silent screams. The sight made my stomach churn, a wave of nausea washing over me as I realized this was a place of significance, a focal point for whatever dark rituals had been performed here, a place where the forest's hunger had been fed, where lives had been taken to appease something ancient and malevolent. I called the others over, my voice hoarse, trembling, the sound barely carrying over the silence of the clearing, and they came, their faces pale as they examined the area, their hands trembling as they touched the altar, their fingers brushing against the moss, the symbols, as if trying to understand what they meant. Unease settled over us like a heavy fog, a shared dread that bound us together, our breaths visible in the cold air as we stood there, the forest silent as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I glanced around, half expecting the hermit to appear, his eyes filled with secrets and madness, his presence a silent accusation, but the clearing remained empty, its silence more menacing than any sound, its shadows deeper, darker, as if they were hiding something just out of sight. That night, I returned to my RV, exhausted and on edge, my body aching from the day's search, my mind racing with thoughts of the altar and the missing hikers, the symbols and the photographs, the pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Sleep was elusive, my dreams plagued by images of the forest, its trees whispering in a language I couldn't understand, their branches reaching for me like skeletal hands, their tips sharp and glistening with something dark, something that dripped onto the forest floor, pooling like ink. I saw the altar, its surface slick with blood, the symbols glowing with a sickly light, their shapes shifting, forming faces that screamed silently, their eyes scratched out, their mouths smeared with black ink, their voices lost to the darkness. I woke to find the RV's windows covered in condensation, the air inside cold and damp, my breath visible in the faint light as I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling as I wiped the glass, the cold biting into my skin. As I cleared the condensation, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. More symbols, etched into the glass from the outside, their shapes rough and jagged, as if carved with a blunt instrument, the scratches deep and deliberate, a message that couldn't be ignored. They were similar to the ones on the trees, the ones on the crate, a series of spirals and intersecting lines that formed a shape like a distorted eye, its center hollow, staring at me from the glass, its gaze unblinking, accusatory. Panic surged through me, a wave of fear that threatened to overwhelm me, as I realized someone had been watching me, had come close enough to leave a message, their presence a silent threat that lingered in the air, a violation of the safety I'd thought I'd found in the RV. I grabbed my camera, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, and took pictures, documenting the evidence before it could disappear, the flash illuminating the symbols, their shapes stark against the glass, a warning I couldn't ignore. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, my heart pounding in my chest, the RV rattling over the uneven roads. The symbols on the glass a constant reminder of the danger I was in. The forest's gaze following me even here, miles from the clearing. Sheriff Dalton examined the photos with a grim expression, his fingers tracing the symbols on the screen, his jaw tightening as he studied them, his eyes darkening with a fear he couldn't hide. "It's escalating," he said, his voice tinged with concern, a hint of desperation that made my stomach twist. "Whoever is behind this, they're getting bolder, more reckless. They want you to know they're watching, that they can reach you." He promised to increase patrols in the area, to send more men into the forest, and advised me to stay alert, to keep my doors locked, to avoid the woods if I could. But I knew that wouldn't be enough, that the forest was vast and unforgiving, its secrets hidden in the shadows, its hunger insatiable, and it felt like we were up against something far beyond our understanding. Something that couldn't be fought with guns or patrols, something that lived in the very earth, in the roots of the trees, in the whispers of the wind. That evening, as I sat in the RV, my nerves frayed, my hands trembling as I clutched a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, his silhouette stark against the fading light, his form tall and gaunt, his presence a silent accusation that sent a chill down my spine. It was the hermit, his eyes fixed on me with that same unnerving intensity, his gaze piercing through the twilight, his face weathered and pale, the lines etched deep with years of solitude and madness. I stepped outside, determined to confront him, to demand answers, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I approached, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating his form, his tattered clothes, his wild hair, the glint of something ancient in his eyes, something that didn't belong to this world. He didn't move, simply watching me with a curious expression, his head tilted slightly, as if I were a puzzle he was trying to solve, a specimen he was studying with a cold, clinical detachment. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, my heart pounding in my chest, the flashlight's beam wavering as I held it, the light casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. The hermit tilted his head further, his gaze shifting to the trees, his eyes glinting with a knowledge I didn't want to understand, a wisdom born of years in the forest, of witnessing things that should never be seen. "The forest remembers," he said cryptically, his voice rough and unused, a gravelly whisper that seemed to echo the wind, the words carrying a weight that pressed down on me, filling me with dread. "It doesn't forget." I frowned, trying to decipher his meaning, my mind racing with questions, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating his face, the lines etched deeper in the harsh light, his eyes sunken and hollow, as if the forest had drained the life from him, leaving only a shell behind. "What does that mean?" I demanded, my voice trembling now, the weight of his words pressing down on me, a truth I didn't want to face. His gaze returned to me, his eyes glinting with a malevolent intelligence, a knowledge that made my skin crawl, a wisdom that spoke of things older than time, things that should have stayed buried. "Sacrifices," he replied, his voice low and haunting, the word a curse that hung in the air, a promise of something terrible. "They demand sacrifices." A chill ran through me, colder than the evening air, my stomach twisting into knots as I realized he was talking about the missing hikers, the photographs in the cabin, the altar in the clearing, the symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Are you part of this?" I demanded, my voice trembling now, the flashlight's beam shaking in my hand, the light flickering as if the forest itself was trying to extinguish it, to plunge us into darkness. He shook his head slowly, his expression unreadable, his eyes never leaving mine, their gaze unblinking, unrelenting. "I'm just a witness," he said, his voice a whisper that seemed to come from the trees themselves, a sound that mingled with the wind, with the rustling leaves, with the distant hoot of an owl. "The forest shows me things that shouldn't be." Before I could ask anything else, he turned and melted into the shadows, his form disappearing into the trees, his presence fading like a ghost, leaving me standing there, bewildered and afraid. His words echoing in my mind like a warning I couldn't ignore, a prophecy I couldn't escape. The next few days were a blur of tension and fear, the town descending into panic as more hikers vanished. Their disappearances a grim reminder of the forest's dark history, a cycle that seemed to repeat itself, an endless hunger that couldn't be sated. The search parties continued, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair, their voices hoarse from calling out names that went unanswered, their hands trembling as they gripped their flashlights, their rifles, their hope dwindling with each passing day, the forest claiming its victims with a relentless, unyielding hunger. On the 5th day, we found something. A makeshift campsite, abandoned and overgrown, its edges marked by towering pines that seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a suffocating canopy that blocked out the sky, casting the space in a dim, greenish haze that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Scattered around were belongings. Backpacks, tents, clothing, all belonging to the missing hikers, their colors faded, their fabric torn, as if they'd been left to the elements for weeks, months, years. A backpack lay open, its contents spilling onto the forest floor. A water bottle, a map, a photograph of a smiling family, their faces untouched, their eyes bright, a stark contrast to the defaced photos in the cabin, a reminder of what had been lost. The tents were slashed open, their canvas flapping in the breeze, the cuts clean and deliberate, as if made by a knife, their edges frayed and stained with something dark, something I didn't want to name. The ground was littered with bones, some animal, others not, their shapes stark against the forest floor, their surfaces weathered and cracked, some still bearing traces of flesh, a grim discovery that made my stomach churn with nausea. A wave of dread that threatened to overwhelm me as I realized this was where the sacrifices had taken place, where the forest had claimed its due, its hunger sated by the lives of the innocent. With each passing day, the forest seemed to close in on us, its secrets lurking just beyond our reach. The sense of unease palpable, a weight that pressed down on us as we searched, our voices echoing through the trees, our calls unanswered, swallowed by the silence. Then, on the 7th day, everything changed, a moment that would mark the end of my journey in the forest, a moment that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was late afternoon, and we were searching a particularly dense section of the forest, the underbrush thick with ferns and brambles, their thorns tearing at our clothes, their sharp points drawing blood that welled up in tiny beads on our skin, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, a smell that seemed to cling to us, to seep into our pores, a reminder of the forest's ancient, unyielding presence. We heard a scream, a blood-curdling sound filled with terror and desperation that echoed through the trees, cutting through the silence like a knife, its pitch high and piercing, a sound that spoke of a fear so profound it transcended words. We ran toward it, our hearts pounding in our chests, branches tearing at our clothes, their thorns drawing blood as we burst into a clearing, our flashlights trembling in our hands, their beams cutting through the dim light, illuminating a scene that would haunt me for years to come. There, kneeling on the ground, was a young woman, disheveled and terrified, her clothes torn and stained with mud, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wild with fear as she looked up at us, clutching a piece of fabric to her chest, her fingers trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body shaking as if she'd been running for her life. She told us her story, her voice trembling with emotion, her words a desperate plea for understanding, a confession that poured out of her like a flood, the dam of her fear finally breaking. She and her friends had been camping, drawn to the forest by the same promise of solitude that had lured me, their campsite not far from mine, their laughter echoing through the trees just days before they'd vanished. They'd stumbled upon the altar, drawn to it by some inexplicable force, a compulsion they couldn't resist, a pull that felt like a whisper in their minds, a voice that wasn't their own, urging them to stay, to explore, to uncover the secrets the forest held. They'd felt compelled to stay, unable to leave despite their growing fear, the forest whispering to them in a language they couldn't understand, its voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated in their chests, filling them with dread. Then the nightmares began, visions of the forest's past, of rituals and sacrifices performed in its depths, the air charged with a malevolent energy that seeped into their dreams, showing them things they couldn't unsee, things that made their blood run cold. They saw shadowy figures moving through the trees, their forms tall and gaunt, their eyes glowing with a sickly light, their hands stained with blood, their voices chanting in a language that sounded like the wind, like the rustling leaves, like the screams of the damned. They saw the altar, its surface slick with blood, the symbols glowing with a life of their own, their shapes shifting, forming faces that screamed silently, their eyes scratched out, their mouths smeared with black ink, their voices lost to the darkness. The hermit had appeared to them, emerging from the shadows like a ghost, his eyes wild with a knowledge they didn't want to understand, warning them of the danger, telling them to leave, to run, to never look back. But they ignored him, believing him to be mad, a relic of the forest's dark history, a man broken by years of solitude and fear. When the others started disappearing, taken one by an unseen force, their screams echoing through the trees, their bodies dragged into the darkness, she'd finally listened, hiding in the woods, her body pressed against the cold earth, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched her friends vanish, their voices fading into the night, their fates sealed by the forest's hunger. She'd only escaped because she'd stumbled upon our search party, drawn by the sound of our voices, her survival a miracle in the face of the forest's relentless appetite, a testament to her will to live, to the hope that had kept her going even as the darkness closed in around her. Her account was both horrifying and enlightening, a glimpse into the malevolent energy that imbued the forest, a force that demanded sacrifice, that fed on fear and despair, a hunger that had been born in the earth, in the roots of the trees, in the whispers of the wind, a hunger that would never be sated. The hermit, far from being a part of it, was merely an observer, a witness to the forest's dark history, a man who had seen too much, who had been broken by the weight of what he'd witnessed, his mind fractured by the horrors he'd seen, his warnings a desperate plea to save others from the fate he'd seen so many suffer. With her testimony, we finally had the evidence we needed to take action, to confront the darkness that had taken root in the forest, to put an end to the cycle of sacrifice that had claimed so many lives. The sheriff organized a thorough search of the forest, determined to put an end to the disappearances once and for all. His face set with a grim resolve, his hands steady as he rallied his men, their voices a chorus of determination that echoed through the town, a promise to bring justice to the lost, to break the forest's hold on the land. It was a grueling task, the forest resisting us at every turn, its shadows deeper, its silence more menacing, as if it knew what we were trying to do, as if it was fighting to keep its secrets, to protect the darkness that lived within it. We moved through the underbrush, our boots sinking into the soft earth, the mud clinging to our soles, the ferns and brambles tearing at our clothes, their thorns drawing blood that welled up in tiny beads on our skin, a reminder of the forest's hunger, of the price it demanded for trespassing on its domain. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, a smell that seemed to cling to us, to seep into our pores, a reminder of the forest's ancient, unyielding presence, a presence that had been here long before us, that would be here long after we were gone. In the end, we found the remains of the missing hikers, buried deep within the forest, their bones scattered among the roots of the towering pines, their shapes stark against the earth, their surfaces weathered and cracked, some still bearing traces of flesh, a grim testament to the forest's hunger, to the lives it had claimed. The bones were arranged in a circle, their positions deliberate, as if they'd been placed there as an offering, a sacrifice to the forest's deity, a ritual that had been performed with a cold, clinical precision, a devotion that spoke of madness, of a belief so profound it had driven the cult to murder, to spill blood to appease something they couldn't see, something they could only feel. The altar was destroyed, its stones shattered with sledgehammers, the symbols erased with shovels and picks, the ground turned over to bury the past, to break the cycle of sacrifice. The air charged with a tentative hope as we worked, our hands trembling, our breaths visible in the cold air, our voices a chorus of defiance against the darkness. As for the hermit, he vanished into the woods, his presence as elusive as ever, a shadow that slipped between the trees, leaving only whispers in his wake, a ghost who had seen too much, who had been broken by the weight of what he'd witnessed. Some say he was a guardian, a protector of the forest who had tried to warn us, to save us from the darkness that lived within it, while others believe he was a madman, driven insane by years of solitude, his mind fractured by the horrors he'd seen, his warnings the ramblings of a broken man. But I believe he was something else entirely, a conduit between our world and the forest's malevolent spirit, a witness to the darkness that had claimed so many lives, a man who had been chosen to bear the weight of the forest's secrets, to carry its burden so others wouldn't have to. In the aftermath, the town tried to move on, the scars of the ordeal running deep, the forest remaining a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its depths, its presence a constant reminder of what we'd lost, of what we'd fought to reclaim. I left shortly after, unable to shake the feeling that it wasn't truly over, that the forest would continue to demand sacrifices, its hunger insatiable, its memory long, its whispers echoing in the corners of my mind, a haunting refrain that followed me even as I drove away, the RV rattling over the uneven roads, the forest a wall of darkness at my back, its gaze unblinking, unrelenting. I returned to the city, the memories of that summer haunting my dreams, the defaced photographs, the symbols on the trees, the altar in the clearing, the hermit's cryptic words, all a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of civilization, a darkness that had reached out and touched me, that had left its mark on my soul. I tried to write my novel, to put the words to paper, to tell the story of what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come, the memories too raw, too real, their weight pressing down on me, a burden I couldn't escape. I'd sit at my desk, the city noise a distant hum, and see the forest in my mind's eye, its trees whispering, its shadows moving, the altar glowing with a sickly light, the symbols pulsing with a life of their own. A reminder that some things can't be forgotten, that some scars never fade. Even now, as I sit here writing this story for you, I can't shake the feeling that the forest is watching, waiting for its next opportunity, its whispers echoing in the corners of my mind, a haunting refrain that never truly fades. The terror I felt is still fresh, a testament to the horrors that unfolded in those woods, a reminder that some places are inherently dark, imbued with a malevolence that defies explanation, a hunger that can't be sated, a memory that doesn't forget. I survived, but the experience changed me, left me with a lingering sense of unease that I can't shake, a shadow that follows me wherever I go, a whisper in the darkness that speaks of things I can't unsee, things I can't unknow. Perhaps that's the true horror of it all. Not the supernatural, not the rituals or the sacrifices, but the knowledge that some places hold a darkness that can't be escaped, a hunger that lives in the earth, in the roots of the trees, in the whispers of the wind, a hunger that will always be there, waiting for the next soul to wander into its depths, to become part of its endless cycle of sacrifice. I'll never go back to those woods, never park my RV by a quiet lake under the stars, never venture into the Pacific Northwest again. The forest claimed its sacrifices, but I refused to be one of them, a choice that haunts me as much as it saves me, a choice that leaves me wondering if I truly escaped, or if the forest is still watching, still waiting, its echoes of the damned a haunting refrain that will follow me to my grave. What about you? Could you face the whispers of the forest, knowing what it demands, knowing the lives it's claimed, the scars it leaves on those who survive? Would you dare to camp in those woods, with nothing but a flashlight and a prayer, knowing that something ancient and malevolent might be waiting in the shadows, its hunger insatiable, its memory long? Some mysteries are better left unsolved, but for those who seek the truth, the forest is always waiting. Its echoes of the damned a haunting refrain that never truly fades, a call to the darkness that lives in us all, a darkness that whispers in the quiet moments, waiting for us to listen.